Welcome to your next lecture in Sentence Skills and Grammar. Last week you learned about writing sentences, and this week we will dive deeper into the world of grammar and discuss regular and irregular verbs. You'll also learn how to use capital letters and how to make effective word choices. Are you ready to get started? Let's begin. First of all, let's review verbs. What is a verb? Recall that verbs are action words. The verb is the word in a sentence that shows what a subject does. All sentences must have verbs, just as they must have subjects. In short, if you compose a sentence, you must make clear who or what is doing what. That doing is your verb. Verbs show action, and they also show time. We can be doing something right now in the present, or we could have done something in the past. We can also plan on doing something in the future. We indicate time by using different verb tenses. Let's take a look. Most verbs have four parts: past, present, past participle, and present participle. These names and how and when they're used confuse the best of us, so just do your best and review as much as you need to. Present tense is the easiest. It indicates action that is happening right now, in this present moment. Listen. I compose a lecture. I listen to music. Those verbs are present. They show what I, the subject of the sentence, am doing right now. Past tense shows what happened previously. I can use the same verb but change the form. Listen. I composed a lecture. I listened to music. Do you see how in both these instances I took the root, or original form of the verb, and added an ed to create the past tense of the verb? Let's try a few more. Prepare is a verb in present tense. What is its past tense? Laugh is a verb in present tense. What is its past tense? Dance is a verb in present tense. What is its past tense? Chances are you came up with prepared, laughed, and danced. Do you see how with the first two verbs, prepare and laugh, you merely added the ed to the root form of the verb? What is different about danced? That's right. Because dance already ends in an e, you didn't need to add one. So with that verb, you only added the d. Well done. Okay, present and past are the easiest forms of the verbs. Let's take another step forward and talk about the participle forms of the verbs. What in the world is a participle exactly? The technical definition of a participle is a verb that can function independently as an adjective. A verb as an adjective? What's going on? The funny part about grammar is that we take it for granted. You use participles all the time. Let's take a look. I ate baked macaroni for dinner last night. Baked is a verb, right? Well, in the following sentence, it is, I baked a birthday cake. But in the original sentence, it's actually an adjective. The word baked describes the macaroni. Listen again. I ate baked macaroni for dinner last night. Ate is actually the verb. Baked is the adjective. Let's look at another. I attended the surprise party. Again, surprise is a verb, but it can also work as an adjective, as it does in this sentence. It's a participle. Participles double as verbs and adjectives, but that's only one of their functions. Existing in both the present and past form, participles can also work alongside another verb, called a helping verb. Helping verbs are have, has, had, and sometimes be. When working with the present participle, we add an ing. When working with the past participle, we add a d or ed. Let's consider a few examples. I prepared for my test. This is normal past tense. If I had prepared for my test, I would have done well. The past participle here is prepared, accompanied by the helping verb had. Let's try another. I prepare for my test. This is the normal present tense. I am preparing for my test. This is the present participle form of prepare, accompanied by the helping verb to be, as in am. I hope I didn't lose you there. Remember that the pesky verb to be conjugates or changes tense kind of awkwardly. In the present, I say I am writing, not I be writing. Similarly, I would say you are handsome, not you be handsome. Be is what is considered an irregular verb. We'll get to these very shortly. Let's look at just a couple more examples. Listen closely to the following sentences. I am laugh so hard right now. Her baby is dance all over the place. These sentences sound odd, don't they? We need to help these verbs out by adding a present participle to them. Watch. I'm laughing so hard right now. Her baby is dancing all over the place. Okay, I think that's more than enough on participles, but they are tricky. Remember, participles can act as an adjective, and they can also exist alongside a helping verb in the past or in the present form. Verbs aren't quite done trying to outsmart us, and that's because not all verbs are regular. By this I mean not all verbs are easy enough to get along with that you can merely add an ed or an ing to them to get them to cooperate. Luckily, most verbs are regular, but the others are irregular. I like to think of the irregular verbs as the ones likely to throw a temper tantrum. We need to pay extra special attention to them and get to know them and their needs a bit more closely. The only way to get to know these verbs is to study them and practice using them correctly. Let's consider a few. I bend the straw. I bent the straw. I have bent the straw. What is going on in this example? Where did that T come from? No one really knows, but we've all said the word bent before. Let's look at a similar one. I send the email. I sent the email. I have sent the email. How about another? I lose my temper. I lost my temper. I have lost my temper. So far, the examples we considered kept the same verb form in the past and present participle, but this isn't always the case. Let's look. I eat the apple. I ate the apple. I have eaten the apple. And this one. The cat hides under the car. The cat hid under the car. The cat was hidden under the car. You might be wondering why there are irregular verbs in the first place. If you are, that's a great question. Verbs are deemed irregular when they have an irregular form in the past tense and past participle. Let's consider just one more example and look at the verb bite. The past tense form of bite is bit. However, if bite followed the same rules as regular verbs, the past tense form would have an ed at the end, making it bited. That doesn't sound right, though. Can you imagine if you heard someone say, "That dog just bited me"? That sounds wrong, and that's because we're conditioned to understand bite as an irregular verb. We say instead, "That dog just bit me." Okay, before I drive you crazy with these irregular verbs, just know they exist. You likely use them all the time naturally, but most definitely take a look at your textbook. Memorizing which verbs are irregular is the only way to keep them straight. So verbs can be regular or irregular. They can exist in present or present participle and past participle. What else? Believe it or not, there are actually 12 verb tenses. The most readily used tenses are present, past, and future, which we've already looked at. Examples to review? Sure thing. Let's start with present tense. I write. Bridget writes. Now let's look at past. I wrote. Bridget wrote. Future. I will write. Bridget will write. Your textbook goes on to provide information about the perfect and progressive verb forms too. Let's take a quick look. Present perfect tense is used to indicate a state of action that begins in the past and leads up to the current time. To express continued action, or when referencing events occurring at an unspecified time in the past, coupled with ever, never, and before. Here's an example of a sentence using the present perfect verb tense. I have written since I was a child. Past perfect is used to describe a past event or condition completed before another event in the past. Let's look at an example. When I got to the bus stop, the bus had already come. Do you see how I'm saying that I went to the bus stop in the past, but that the bus had already come even further in the past? To pull this off, I need to use the past perfect verb tense. Future perfect tense expresses action that will be completed by or before a specified time in the future. Let's take a look. By the end of the month, I will have written my next chapter. In this example, the will have written refers to action that will occur in the future by the end of the month. Take a deep breath. I just did. Can there possibly be more verb tenses? There are, but don't stress. Remember, I'm introducing them to you in this lecture. You couldn't possibly be expected to remember them all. Review and practice is what mastery is all about. So study your textbook, make flashcards, and practice. Progressive verbs are next, and they too come in past, present, and future. Verbs in the present progressive tense are formed by adding a version of the verb to be. Remember, in the present tense, this can be am, are, is, plus the base form of the verb, plus ing. Here are some examples of forming present progressive verbs. Am working, are arguing, is running. In all three of these examples, you see a form of the verb to be, followed by a verb ending in ing. But what are present progressive verbs used for? We use present progressives to show actions or conditions that are still in progress at a particular time. For example, I am writing right now. Am writing is the present progressive form of the verb to write in this example. We can also use present progressive verbs to indicate a fixed plan in the near future. For example, I am going to San Francisco on Sunday. Past progressives are formed when we take a past tense form of the verb to be, was or were, and add that to the root form of a verb plus ing. Here are a few examples. She was worrying about her brother last week. The last I checked, he was fixing his car. As you can see, although we are dealing with action that happened in the past, we use a verb form that ends in ing, just the way we did with the present progressive. One more set. Can you guess what? That's right, future progressive. Of the progressives, these might be the easiest verbs to form. We simply take will, add the verb to be, and tack on our root verb ending in ing. As always, here are a few examples. I will be visiting San Francisco this weekend. I will be going to the gym after I eat that piece of chocolate cake. I will be sorry when I am out of money. The final category of verbs we'll discuss is the perfect progressives, and as always, they come in past, present, and future. We use a present perfect progressive form of a verb when something started in the past and continues until now. To form the present perfect progressive, we use have or has, plus been, plus a verb ending with ing. For example, it has been raining for 16 days. We use the past perfect to show two actions that happened in the past, but at different times in the past. Past perfect progressive comes in handy when we want to express the duration of one or more of the activities. For example, before moving to California, I had been living in New Jersey for 25 years. Before living in Santa Cruz, I had been studying in San Francisco for 3 years. Future perfect progressives are the final verb tense on our agenda. We use this verb tense when we want to know or tell someone how long an action has been happening at a future point. We form the future perfect progressive by combining will have been with a verb ending in ing. For example, by 2009, I will have been graduated from high school for 10 years. Verb tenses are tough. Progressives and perfects and progressive perfects. How can we keep them all straight? Try to make sense of them by using them. Challenge yourself. Can you correctly write a sentence using each of the verb forms? Helping verbs, the verbs that accompany the ing and ed forms of the verbs we were just talking about, include be, have, and do, and all forms of these verbs. For example, forms of be include is, am, are, were, was, etc. While they work great as helpers, these verbs can also stand alone, as you can hear in the following examples. I do my homework. I have a cat. The dog is asleep. There's one more thing I want to say about verbs and verb forms. Have you ever heard of the word verbal? It's likely you haven't. Verbals are words formed from verbs. They, like verbs, express action. Verbals come in three forms: infinitives, participles, and gerunds. An infinitive is to and the base form of a verb. Infinitives can serve as both subjects and objects of sentences. Consider the following examples, asking yourself whether the infinitive is the subject or the object of the sentence. I like to run. Megan likes to bake. Bridget asked Heather to borrow her book. To buy a house is my goal. A participle is a verb form used as an adjective. Regular past participles end in D or ED, and present participles end in ING. Let's look. I looked at my wilted orchid. Do you see how, although wilt is a verb, here it is used as an adjective to describe the orchid? Let's try another. Jennifer returned the borrowed book. Here, borrow, again a verb, is used as an adjective. How can we describe the book? The book was borrowed. Finally, we have gerunds, my favorite of the verbals. A gerund is an ing form of a verb that is used as a noun. Let's take a look. Cooking is a great stress relief. Cooking is not the verb of the sentence in this example. Is the verb, a form of to be. Cooking is a noun. How is that possible? Only using a gerund. Let's try just one more. I am going running. Again, running is not the verb of this sentence. Yet surely run is a verb. Instead, running acts as a noun. It's a thing I, as the subject of this sentence, am going to do. I recommend that you practice using verbals by writing a few of each. Enough about verb forms. Next, let's talk about subject-verb agreement. A verb must agree with its subject. What does this mean? Let's start our explanation with a few examples. The dog bark at the mail carrier. The cat run up the tree. The boy linger at the scene of the crime. Some members of the book club wants to read something else. It's likely that you're thinking that none of these sentences sound right, and you're correct. The reason is that the verbs don't agree with the subjects. Let's look at correct versions of these same sentences. The dog barks at the mail carrier. The cat runs up the tree. The boy lingers at the scene of the crime. Some members of the book club want to read something else. Doesn't that sound better? Let's consider the rules. A singular subject takes a singular verb. A plural subject takes a plural verb. Sounds easy enough, right? A single subject is one person or thing. A plural subject is more than one person or thing. In the example sentences above, all of the subjects were single except in the last sentence. Dog, cat, and boy are all single subjects. But members is plural because the word implies that there is more than one member. Okay, that's the gist of subject-verb agreement. But let's look at some instances where mistakes occur. Words, often prepositional phrases, sometimes come between the subject and the verb. But these extra words do not change the subject-verb agreement. Let's take a look. The cost of food, shelter, and entertainment combined exceeds my paycheck. This sentence threatens to confuse us. Let's dissect it to see why. Although the subject, cost, is singular, and the verb exceeds is also singular, there are some extra words between the subject and the verb: food, shelter, and entertainment. Your textbook recommends that you cross out, either mentally or on paper, any words in between the subject and verb. If we did this, we'd have, the cost exceeds my paycheck. This makes sense. But if we had somehow gotten lost in the agreement of subject and verb, we might have instead said, the cost exceed my paycheck. This is a singular noun, but a plural verb, which doesn't work. Check out your textbook for some additional examples. Sometimes sentences are structured so that the verb comes before the subject. This is another instance in which it becomes tricky to get the subject-verb agreement correct. When sentences are structured this way, the verb is usually a form of to be. Let's look. There are ducks in the pond. Where is the book I lent you? In both of these sentences, the verb, either is or are, came before the subject. If we had structured these sentences so the subject came before the verb, they would have looked like this. Ducks are in the pond. The book I lent you is where? Regardless of what comes first, subject or verb, they must be aligned. The examples I gave you are correct. Let's see what they would look like if our subjects and verbs did not agree. There is ducks in the pond. Where are the book I lent you? Clearly, this doesn't work. People also get confused about subject-verb agreement when they're dealing with compound subjects. A compound subject is two subjects separated by a joining word such as and. Take a look at this example. Johan and Harry walk to the store after going to school and buy a bag of potato chips. The sentence above has two subjects joined by the word and. The first subject is Johan, and the second subject is Harry. When we work with compound subjects, we take a plural form of the verb, as we did in the above subject. Johan and Harry walked to the store to buy a bag of potato chips. Had we said Johan and Harry walks to the store to buys a bag of potato chips, our subject would not agree with our verb. There's one variation of this I'd like to present to you. Sometimes we work with a compound subject that is a mixture of singular and plural verbs. Watch this. The dog and the cats play in the yard. As you can see, the subject dog is singular, but the subject cats is plural. In an instance like this, we take the subject that is closest to the verb and use that subject to determine whether our verb will be singular or plural. So in this example, we use the subject cats to form the verb play. The cats play in the yard. This works when we add the single subject dog. The dog and the cats play in the yard. Had we said the dog and the cats plays in the yard instead, this sounds wrong, because it is wrong. There's just one more topic I want to cover in terms of subject-verb agreement, and that is using indefinite pronouns. Indefinite pronouns are special because they are always paired with singular verbs. Indefinite pronouns are those pronouns that end in one, like anyone and everyone. They can also end in body, like everybody and somebody. Or they can end in thing, like anything and everything. Each, neither, and either are also indefinite pronouns. We certainly use indefinite pronouns often, but let's look at how they work when paired with a verb. Consider the following sentence. Do you see how the indefinite pronoun uses the singular verb? Nobody goes to that mall. Now take a look at the same sentence with a plural verb. Nobody go to that mall. Do you see the difference? As opposed to the other subject-verb agreement challenges we just talked about, working with indefinite pronouns is thankfully a little bit easier. Remember, they are always paired with a singular verb. Let's take a look at a few more examples. Anything goes. Everything is the same. Somebody likes good music. In all of these sentences, we use singular verbs. Goes, is, likes. Try the exercises in your textbook to master subject-verb agreement. And remember to be in touch with your instructor if you are at all confused. Next, let's talk about capital letters. When it comes to capitalization, you must always capitalize the following. 1. The first word in a sentence or direct quotation. 2. Names of persons and the word I. 3. Names of particular places. 4. Names of days of the week, months, and holidays. 5. Names of commercial products. 6. Titles of books, magazines, newspapers, articles, stories, poems, films, television shows, songs, papers that you write, and the like. 7. names of companies, associations, unions, clubs, religious and political groups, and other organizations. That list includes the most common use of capital letters. However, your textbook mentions quite a few others, which you should also be familiar with. Let's take a look at an example. Can you spot any capitalization errors in the following sentences? Teresa and her friend Marlena went shopping for dinner. They went to Joe's Organic Market to get the produce. Do you see anything funny about the sentence above? Well, for starters, Teresa's name is not capitalized. We know that one of the rules of capitalization states that all names should be capitalized, and the first word of a sentence is always capitalized. Now let's take a look at the word friend. Why is that capitalized? There is no need to capitalize the word friend unless it is at the beginning of the sentence, which it's not. Now let's look at the second sentence. Do you remember what you learned about capitalizing names? Names of businesses and organizations are always capitalized, so Joe's Organic Market should really be Joe's Organic Market. The sentence should look like this. Teresa and her friend Marlena went shopping for dinner. They went to Joe's Organic Market to get the produce. Be sure to review capitalization when you complete your reading assignment. How are you holding up? We've covered a lot of important information in this lecture, and we're almost done. We'll look at effective word choices and then manuscript form. When writing, it is important to try to avoid using cliches. A cliché is an expression that has been worn out through constant use. An example of a cliché is the expression trials and tribulations, or last but not least. These expressions are used so often that they have lost the charm and originality they once had. Instead of using clichés, try putting some color into your writing and aim to sound as specific as possible. For example, instead of saying last but not least, you might say, they got around to showing our documentary last, but the applause from the crowd made it obvious that it was appreciated by everyone. Do you see how this is a much more specific statement than just last but not least? Some writing instructors would tell you that if you must use a cliché, it shows your reader that you're unable to think of anything clever and original of your own. You certainly won't want anyone to think that. In addition to avoiding clichés, you should also refrain from using slang in your writing. It's one thing to use slang in everyday conversations with your friends, but using slang is not acceptable in academic or professional writing. For example, you might say to a friend, "That car is bangin'. I want it so bad." However, the word bangin' is hardly appropriate for school or work. Can you imagine if you wrote the following in an essay? Henry VIII had a bangin' wardrobe. Do you see how bangin' is inappropriate? Instead, it would be better to use a colorful adjective that describes Henry VIII's wardrobe, like exquisite. Lastly, you should avoid pretentious language. What is this? Pretentious is defined as making an excessive claim to great merit or importance, or appearing snobby or arrogant. Sometimes people use pretentious words to appear smart, but the plan can backfire. Take a look at this example. The meeting shall commence at 4 o'clock. Doesn't that sound a little funny? The sentence, the meeting will begin at 4 o'clock, relays the same message without the funny word choices. Your textbook includes an example that makes me giggle, so I'll reproduce it here. It was a splendid opportunity to get some slumber. What does this sentence mean to you? It was a good chance to get some sleep. The bottom line is, don't use fancy, archaic, or inappropriate language just to try to impress your audience with your vocabulary. Speak clearly, or else no one will understand what you're talking about. I think that's plenty of grammar for one day, and thanks for your attention. Remember, review and practice will make grammar come easily. Before we conclude today's lecture, let's briefly turn our focus to manuscript form. Manuscript form is the required format for any paper you hand in. You should always keep a few points in mind when preparing a paper, whether it's for your academic or professional life. Here are some tips. Remember to skip a line between the title and the first line of the paper. Indent the first line of each paragraph about 5 spaces from the left-hand margin. You can easily accomplish this by pressing Tab on most keyboards. If you must handwrite your paper, use black or blue pen. Make sure your handwriting is clear and easy to read. These are just a few of the things you should double-check before submitting an essay. For a more complete list, please consult your textbook.